بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على عبده ورسوله نبينا وإمامنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. May Allah bless you all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your good deeds and increase you. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us all beneficial knowledge and righteous action. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this sitting of ours and this gathering of the brothers and the sisters locally and worldwide one of barakah, one of blessing, and one of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and one that is fruitful and beneficial, and one which will allow us to walk away therefrom with countless good deeds and also beneficial pieces of information or pieces of beneficial information. Allahumma ameen. With that being said, the last thing that we mentioned in our last class, and alhamdulillah, last class was last week, was the death of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The death of the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. We mentioned his birth and also his death. We discussed many important issues, many very practical principles with regards to properly understanding the seerah, history as a whole, and the prophetic history, the Islamic history specifically. We mentioned many of those things in last week's class. And some of the things that the ulama of Islam have said about the Prophet ﷺ with regards to him being born on Monday and the revelation being sent down upon him on Monday and him passing away ﷺ on Monday. And the date of his birth, and what year was it, and how the Arabs calculated time, and what was their calendar, or what they called or what they used as a calendar, and how we benefit from that in 2018. And it isn't specific to Islam, nor is it specific to the Arabs. There were many cultures and many civilizations and many races that had different types of calendars, even to this day. Even to this day. When we say September, October, November, 2018, so on and so forth, BC, AD, that doesn't mean that the entire world uses that and recognizes that. And obviously, English has become a universal language, has become one of the most, if not the most dominant language in the world. Wherever you go, from Germany to Guatemala to Niger to Guam, wherever you go, in any airport, if you get stuck, or any place in which there's an emergency, and you don't speak the local language, or the language of the local people, one way or another, someone knows English. There is someone who knows English. From a cartoon, from a movie, from a comic book, someone knows some type of English. You may be in South America, or Central America, or Mexico, which is predominantly, the language is predominantly Spanish, 99% if not, al-muhim, Spanish dominates those parts of the world. Someone speaks English. In the continent of Africa, North Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, they speak English. Wherever you go, someone is going to know some type of English. And that's not always the case with Urdu, or Punjab, or Spanish, or Japanese, or Korean, or Russian, or German, or French, or Italian, which are popular languages as well. So since English has become a very popular language, if not the most dominant language, then there are other cultural aspects and religious influences of the English that have also become dominant, such as the calendar. And it's all connected. The language, the calendar, and many other political, social, and religious norms that come from England, and the way of the cross and the crown. This is the reality of life. But everybody doesn't believe in the cross and the crown. So there are other civilizations that have calendars that they still use, or they still acknowledge, and it's from their heritage and their culture. But getting on a flight, an airplane, a sporting event, the Olympics and things like this, of course, is going to go back to that dominant language and that dominant character. You understand this? Wherever the Olympics are being held, they're not going to say in the year of this and the year of that. The year of the rat, the year of the monkey. They're not going to say this name. No, they're going to use English. The Gregorian calendar, AD, BC, etc. And the reason behind that is what I just explained. You understand this? And nothing is an accident and nothing is a coincidence. And this is basic history that we should all know about. Nothing is an accident and nothing is a coincidence. Everyone understand this? So therefore, there are different civilizations that had different timelines and different calendars. And from those civilizations or those nations were the Arabs. And they had a calendar and they had a timeline in which they named the years based off of the events. The most important event, the most detrimental thing, the most dangerous thing, the biggest thing that took place during a year, that was the name of the entire year. So the Prophet was born in Amul Fil, the year of the event of the elephant, the year of the attack of the elephant army, the year of the elephant general. You understand this? And the Kaaba, without any question, was and is, but specifically it was a major central figure of their culture and society, in their religion, Quraysh. Abraham's constructed place of worship, and Ismail, وهكذا. So therefore, this man coming to destroy this holy place and this sacred place to the mushrikun, it was holy and sacred to them. And that's why Allah Azza wa Jalla clearly says, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Let them worship the one who owns this bait, that they respect and honor and venerate, the Kaaba. Even though they were performing shirk, and they were making tawaf naked, and making sacrifices for gods and deities. But they knew who Allah was and they respected the Kaaba. So this person who tried to come and destroy the Kaaba and knock it down and tear it down and make his own temple, they called the year by what Allah did to that man and his army. أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ أَلَمْ يَجْعَلْ كَيْدَهُمْ فِي تَضْلِيلٍ. It's to the end of the surah. Alright? And as we've explained before, Surah Fil and Surah Quraysh, many of the ulama say, are basically one surah. You understand this? There are two surahs in the Uthmani Mus'haf. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is between the two. But many of them say that it's actually one surah. فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَعَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ. Allah, He turned them, He made them, He cut them down until they were like what? Asfin ma'kul. Plants and herbage, foliage cut down, chewed in half. لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ. For the travel of Quraysh and the safety of Quraysh and the protection of Quraysh. إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. Their travels during the shita, the winter, and the summer, meaning to Syria, to Shem, for trade and commerce, goods, selling things, buying things. So Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions that He destroyed Abraha. He destroyed that Abyssinian general and his terrible army, that formidable army. He destroyed them for what? And for who? For Quraysh. For the preservation of their society and their civilization, for them to be kept safe when they travel and when they move from Mecca to Syria. And that is why فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Pay back Allah. Repay Allah and worship Him and only Him. Make tawheed and abandon shirk. الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. He who fed them when they were hungry, and He who kept them safe when they were afraid, because there was no winning. Quraysh was not going to stand up to Abraha and his army. The Abyssinians and many other civilizations and cultures were far more advanced than the Arabs at that time. Socially, politically, with regards to affairs of war and military, they were advanced. The Arabs were simple. They couldn't read and write, most of them. Most of them couldn't read and write. And these Jews and Christians in different societies, they had temples, they had buildings, they had structures. They had an art of war, attacking on an elephant. So they didn't necessarily stand a chance. But Allah Azza wa Jalla miraculously protected them and kept them safe and destroyed their enemies. So therefore, worship me and only me. That's the meaning of those two surahs. That's the meaning of those two surahs. And every Muslim should understand this. Every Muslim should know the basics of Jazama, as we've explained. Every single Muslim should know the basics of this surah. Who was Abraha? When, why, and where? Why does Allah say that He sent birds upon them, etc.? So this was a major happening, a major event in history and to the Arabs, and that is why they called that year Amul Fil, the year of the elephant, because that was the biggest and most notable thing that happened during the entire year. And that's how they called that year. And that's the year in which the Prophet ﷺ was born in. And we also mentioned the equivalent of this year in the Western calendar, whether you call it Gregorian or Sun calendar or Viking calendar or Chinese calendar. Allahu Alam, who found the calendar, who found the exploration of the new world, quote unquote. Al-Muhim, we mentioned the date in which the Prophet ﷺ was said to be born. And also the month, the equivalent of the month in which he's said to be born in the common era. Now, khair inshallah. Moving forward. We mentioned last week about how the Prophet ﷺ was shrouded and how he was buried, alayhi salatu wasalam. And some of the people who entered the grave of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ and assisted in his burial. Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, قال ويقال كان أسامة بن زيد وأوس بن الخولي معه. He mentions more companions who have said to enter into the grave and place the Prophet's sacred body into his grave. خيرا إن شاء الله تعالى. He says here, قال الحاكم وأبو أحمد يقال مات عبد الله والد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ولد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم 28 شهرا وقيل 19 وقيل 17 وقيل شهران وقيل مات وهو حمل وتوفي بالمدينة قال الواقدي وكاتبه محمد بن سعد لا يثبت عنه أنه توفي وهو حمل. طيب. He then discusses how old was the Prophet's father when he died, when he became an orphan. And we know that a person being an orphan in English or in American or Western values or cultures has a bit of a broader meaning than that in Arabic or the Islamic sense. In Arabic, and obviously in Islam, a person is an orphan if he loses his father. Even if you have your mother, you're still considered an orphan. And you're only an orphan if you lose your father before puberty. If you lose your father after puberty, you're not considered an orphan in Islam. Obviously, in America, a person who has his mother or her mother alive and taking care of them as their guardian is not considered a what? An orphan. But in Islam, in the Arabic culture or language, one who loses his father before puberty is considered an orphan. It's considered an orphan. And the deepness of the Arabic language, subhanAllah, the word yatim, orphan, comes from al-yutm, wa huwa al-kasb. And the word linguistically means money. It linguistically means breadwinner, bringing home provisions and sustenance. So the yatim is the one who doesn't have one to bring home his food. Man of the house. You understand the language? The man of the house. That the man is supposed to provide and sustain and pay for things. You understand this? So the Messenger of Allah, we know that he was an orphan. So they discuss when his father passed away. Some of them, they say that Abdullah, the Prophet's father, died, and the Messenger of Allah ﷺ was 18 months old. 18 months old. He was a young baby. Some say 19 months. Some say 17 months. And some even say that the Prophet ﷺ wasn't even born yet. That his father died when his mother was pregnant. And then the footnotes here is a discussion here. It says, الذي عليه جمهور العلماء أن أبا نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم عبد الله ابن عبد المطلب قد توفي ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم حمل في بطن أمه وممن رجح ذلك ابن القيم وابن كثير والذهبي وابن حجر وابن الجوزي وظاهر في قوله تعالى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى وأبلغ اليتم وأعلى مراتبه موت والده وهو جنين صلى الله عليه وسلم في بطن أمه. The one who makes the footnotes, the annotator, he says that most of the ulama hold the view, not all of them, but most of them say that the Prophet's father died while the Messenger of Allah was in his mother's womb, before he was even born. You don't understand this? They say that his father passed before his mother gave birth to him. From the ulama who held this view was Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, Ibn Kathir, al-Dhahabi, Ibn Hajar, Ibn al-Jawzi, and others. And he says, and this is zahir, is not textual, it's not text, but is apparent. It's apparent when Allah Azza wa Jalla says, Alam yajidka yatiman fa'awa. Allah says, has Allah not found you as a yatim? Fa'awaka. And he supported you. And he gave you a place, and he gave you someone to look after you. And they said that the worst and the high, or the highest level of a person being an orphan is for his father to die before he's even born. That's much worse than him being 2 or 3 or 4, etc. In which the father isn't there at all from the get-go. Khairan inshallah. Moving forward. He says, وَمَا تَجَدُّهُ عَبْدُ الْمُطَّلِبْ وَلَهُ ثَمَانْ سِنِينَ وَقِيلَ 6 سِنِينَ وَأَوْصَى بِهِ إِلَى أَبِي طَالِبٍ. As far as his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, then he died when the Prophet was 8 years old. 8. He was 8 years old. He was a small boy. And some say 6 years old. And when he died, when he was on his deathbed, he placed Abu Talib in charge of him. Look after this boy. Look after my grandson. You take care of him. You're now his guardian. وماتت أم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وله 6 سنين وقيل 4 سنين وماتت بالأبواء مكان بين مكة والمدينة. And before we move forward, this goes to show us, brothers and sisters, is that Allah Azza wa Jalla is going to protect His deen. And He's going to protect those who uphold His deen. It doesn't matter who or through whom or how, but Allah will protect the deen. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla, He could place a non-Muslim or wicked person to do certain things that He wants for the protection of His deen. The Messenger of Allah was kept safe by these people who were mushrikun. They were people of shirk. They worshipped idols. They had deities. But Allah Azza wa Jalla, He made them to look after the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Another lesson that we take from this, learning this part of the seerah, and we have to never ever forget this, guys, that we just don't read this just for information, just for facts, but it has to be tangible benefit that we get from it. It has to be a tangible benefit that we get from it. It has to be nutritional value. It can't just be junk food from a class. It sounds good. Oh, that's nice. And I've memorized this, and I've heard this, and I've studied this book. But it has to be something that we benefit from it in our daily lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on a daily basis. And that is the definition of ilm nafi', beneficial knowledge. And it's not just a fact or a piece of information or a theory, something that's romanticized and, yeah, oh, that's nice, it sounds good. No, it has to be something that you benefit from. And from the things that we benefit is that it's not important how you start off. Okay, it's not always significant how you start off, but it's significant how you end, how you finish, how you stop. The end of the race is the most important thing. So the Prophet was alone. The Prophet, he went through these hardships, he went through these difficulties, and look what happened in the end. Look what happened what? In the end. And this is something which is a very consistent and vivid Quranic theme in many, many surahs. And from the most vivid of those surahs is Surah Yusuf. How he started off. And all of the tribulation that he went through, and the strife that he went through. Fitna after fitna after fitna after fitna. With his brothers, his fathers, those who had captured him or captured him, took him into slavery, sold him, that scandalous woman, the jail, the prison, and it never stopped. But at the end, he got on the throne, and they bowed down to him. And he says, this is the interpretation of my dream from all those years ago. Those years ago when I saw those planets, those things prostrating to me, this is the interpretation of it right now. So you may start off, it may be in a rough way, or rough manner. You may go through things in your life. You may be a non-Muslim. You may be wicked. You may be this, you may be that. What's important is how you die. What's important is how you end, how you finish. And Allah Azza wa Jalla will test His servants. He will test His servants. So don't ever forget that at the end of the day, the outcome is for the pious. So therefore, Abdul Muttalib, his grandfather died and the Prophet was 8 years old. And then he gave instruction to Abu Talib to look after him, as if they knew that he was special and that he was to be looked after and taken care of. As far as the Messenger of Allah's mother, and we also mentioned this last week, that his parents were not upon Islam. They were not upon Islam. His mother died when he was 6, and some say 4. And he also mentions the place in which he died, a place between Mecca and Medina. وَبُعِثَ صَلَّى اللَّهُ رَسُولًا إِلَى النَّاسِ كَافَةً وَهُوَ ابْنُ 40 سَنَةً وَقِيلَ 40 وَيَوْمٍ. And he was made a messenger to all of mankind at the age of 40. At the age of 40. And some say he was 40 وَيَوْمٍ. 40 years and 1 day. 40 years and 1 day. Some of the ulama, they say that the reason why Allah Azza wa Jalla sent him at 40 years old is because 40 years old is considered to be the balanced prime of a man. If you're talking about sports and athleticism, then obviously 40 isn't necessarily your prime. Your body is beginning to wane. Your strength and your speed is beginning to wane. It can still be there, but your best days are definitely behind you with regards to strength and speed. As far as savvy, finesse, experience, generalship, then you may still have it at 40. You still may what? You still may have it. And you may be better than some of the young guys on the court or the field, right? You may have to school them, show them. Especially if they get a little disrespectful, right? Start talking crazy, right? You put some more old school moves on them. And this is proven in sports. You have some athletes, some veterans that are very, very, very good. But their goodness is, like I said, in finesse and savvy. But the sheer raw speed and raw strength is generally behind them. The best of it. But as far as Islam, as far as a person living as a man, as far as a person being a leader, a scholar, and things like this, then 40 years old is considered to be the beginning of your prime. Whereas your body isn't decrepit, you're not old and aching and aging, and your bones are brittle and cracked up, but you're not young. And the things which are stereotypically or presupposedly attached to youth, such as haste and impulsiveness and narrow-mindedness and short-sight, and strong, oftentimes uncontrollable lust as a young man. And this is one of the wisdoms of the Prophet saying about the people on the Day of Judgment, that we've been punished by Allah. Allah will not look to them, He will not speak to them, He will not purify them. And from those people, the hadith says, O shaymitun zanin, is an aged fornicator. Someone who's old, his beard is black and white, and he's still making zina. And the reason why they say this is because he still has lusts. Of course, zina is haram for a young person, but the older person is supposed to be more matured. He's supposed to be more aged. He's supposed to have been through life now. And also, he's supposed to have daughters and granddaughters by now. So he's supposed to have begun to pump his brakes a little bit. I can't keep doing this. It's not right. Not only is it not right, it's bad, it's haram, but now I have little girls that are growing into young women. All right? And we all know that this is one of the reasons why many men don't like having girls. We explained this in the khutbah before last week. Way of flowers, right? About the Prophet ﷺ statement, Man ala jariyataini hatta tablugha ja'a yawm al-qiyamati ana wa huwa wa dhamma asabi'ahu. The narration of Anas radiallahu anhu, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that he who raises two girl children until they reach puberty will be like this with me, in paradise. He has two girls and he raises them until they're old enough. So we said that the Arabs in general, they weren't necessarily fond of having girl children. And we explained some of the reasons why they weren't fond of having girl children. Their jealousy, their sense of shame and dishonor. That man, Qais ibn Asim al-Taymi, he was a warrior and he was fighting. And he went to war with a neighboring clan or neighboring tribe, and his daughter was captured. And she was taken as a spoil of war, a concubine. And when the fighting was over and it began to come to peace and to an armistice, the man, he brought his daughter. And the owner of the girl, regardless whether he married her or not, the man that was with her, he gave her the option. He says, you can go back to your father, we're done fighting, or you can stay with me. And she chose to stay with her spouse, or to stay with her master. So he was broken. And he swore that after that, I'll never have a girl unless I bury her alive. There's no way that this can happen to me again. It's shameful. Not only is my daughter a concubine, but she chose him over me. This is one of the reasons why they will bury their girl daughters alive. Because they were afraid out of utter shame. Everyone understand this? And there are other reasons as well. But today in our culture, alhamdulillah, I don't think this problem is like how it was in ancient Arabia. However, many brothers, not all, they don't like having girls. And one of the reasons why they don't like having girls is because they don't pay backs. It's reality. How many girls did you sleep with and manipulate? How many girls' virginity did you take and the innocence that you stole from them and discarded them? Now, you have a little daughter now. She's in puberty and she's growing and developing, and there are boys, dogs and wolves, panting and licking their tails down. Some of the ulama of Islam, they say that a zina is a debt that must be paid off. Some of them, they've mentioned this. They say that zina, once you do it, it's a debt that you have to repay. And they say that you pay back the debt with your daughter. Some of them, they mention this through experience and history, is that it's going to come back to you one way or another. Now, is this a hadith of the Prophet? We're not saying that. But it's wisdom. And they say what goes around comes around. So oftentimes brothers, they don't want to have girls because they know how foul they were when they were younger. They know how foul they were when they were younger. So that's when you're younger. But when you get older, 40, 50, 60, you're supposed to have more self-control. You're supposed to have more wisdom. You're supposed to have regret and remorse. You're 60 years old. You have gray in your beard and you run around chasing girls. Chasing young girls. It's not right. And that's the meaning of that hadith, is that he will have a specific punishment, the one whose beard is gray and black. Even if you have henna. Even if you henna it out, sheikh, it's still gray. The person who's a fornicator and he's old. So therefore, the Prophet ﷺ was made a messenger at 40. He was made a messenger at 40. And that's because 40 years old, the body is still strong, relatively strong. And the mind is beginning its next phase of maturity and growth. And a man who's 40 isn't too old, his memory is still sharp, but he isn't too young. It's like a perfect balance. So this is one of the wisdoms of the Prophet ﷺ being sent as a messenger at the age of 40. On a side note, we all know about what's mentioned in the Quran about وَكَوَاعِبَ أَتْرَابًا. Okay, and other ayats about women and men being in paradise at a specific age. And some of the ulama, they say 33 years old will be the age of the people of paradise. And there's the wisdom behind that is your body is still physically strong. And your mind, etc. Right, moving forward. وقام بمكة بعد النبوة 13 سنة وقيل 10 وقيل 15 سنة ثم هاجر إلى المدينة فقام بها 10 سنين بلا خلاف وقدم المدينة يوم الاثنين ل12 خلت من شهر ربيع الأول. قال الحاكم وبدأ الوجع برسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في بيت ميمونة يوم الأربعاء لليلتين باقيتان من شهر صفر. So the Prophet ﷺ was made a messenger at 40. And there are many different issues that pertain to the life of the Prophet ﷺ before he became a messenger. First, or one question one may ask is, what was the religion of the Messenger of Allah before he was a messenger? What was his deen? Was he upon the deen of his forefathers? Was he on the deen of his forefathers? Yes or no? No, you say. You say he was protected from being on the deen of his forefathers. Teacher, what you think?
Okay, no, he was.
Sheikh.
No.
He was on the deen of his forefathers.
Yeah,
What you say, Sheikh? The deen of his forefathers.
He was.
He was.
Ibrahim
Ibrahim was his forefather. Watch out for the curveball, Sheikh. That's right. You gotta watch out for the what? The head movement all the time. Shoulder, you gotta watch out for the feint. He fell for it though. The okie doke, right? We call it. And with him, his forefather was Ismail alayhi salam. And Ismail was the son of Ibrahim. And Ismail was one of the grandfathers of the Arabs. And he was a monotheist. Now, that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, he wasn't on the religion of his forefathers, meaning his direct forefathers, the people of Shirk. So he wasn't a messenger, he wasn't a prophet. The way of Ibrahim and Ismail, much of it was preserved, but much of it was lost. And people had switched and changed and replaced it with shirk and kufr and murder and all the crimes that they were making against themselves and against Allah. So the Prophet wasn't upon the way of those forefathers, but he was upon the way of his real forefathers. And this is important. As we explained last week about, I think it was maybe the first class, I'm not sure, about knowing your lineage and your heritage. And it doesn't mean that you're a nationalist. And it doesn't mean that you're a bigot or a fanatic. It doesn't mean that you're a racist. It does not mean that. As Allah clearly tells in the Quran that He made us into tribes and clans. He made us into families and races for us to know each other. You don't know who's your family, how can you respect your family and treat them kindly and give them dawah? You don't know who your father is. And it's not an accident. It isn't an accident. It's not an accident why it is such a hard line stance pushed against any type of speech about someone's background or ancestry in our community, in our country. It is not an accident. Because once you do that, it's going to change you as a person. Once you do that, it has an effect on you as a person with regards to living properly, giving dawah, and looking after your family and changing your social state. So it's not haram for a person to say, my lineage is Irish. This is where my family was from. This is where my mother was from. So on and so forth. You have this amount of it in your blood. There's nothing wrong with that. Or my family was indigenous American. Or my family came from Africa. There's nothing wrong with that. And knowing your background and respecting your family members. Now going extreme, it's a different story. Becoming a bigot and a fanatic, that's a different story. But to know who you are and where you come from, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's haram in Islam. And it's not an accident why it's such a staunch position put against that. But every other person or race or culture can. It doesn't make any sense. And it's not just a black thing. As I said, Irish. It can be anything. Wherever you come from, okay? So the Prophet ﷺ, they say that he was protected from shirk. He never made shirk. And he never ever felt comfortable with the worship of idols. Even though he didn't have the details of Al-Islam. He didn't have the details of Al-Islam. And this is what's meant when Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًا فَهَدَى. And he found you dal. وَلَا ضَالِينَ. Someone would say, literal translation, astray and misguided. But we don't say that about the Prophet ﷺ. He was unaware. He was unaware. As Allah mentions in other ayats, that you didn't know what the book was or what Iman was. So the Prophet ﷺ was unaware of the details of legislation. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla gave him the legislation. He gave them the revelation. But before that, he never ever made shirk. He never made shirk. So him being upon the way of his forefathers is a yes and a no answer. A yes and a what? A no answer. And what brought me to speak about this was, talking about ancestry and lineage and heritage, is that you may have a non-Muslim family member, your mother or your grandmother or your aunt or your aunt, and they may say, why are you following that Arab religion or that Middle Eastern religion or that terrorist religion? You're American, or you're black, or you're white, or you're Irish, or you're this, or you're Puerto Rican, you're Hispanic. That's not your way, that's not the way of your people. Right? Why would you cut your family ties and sever your family ties? Your whole family grew up in a church and was raised in a church. Your mother, your father is a pastor, a preacher. You sang in the choir. Why would you change and try to look like some Arab people? So many people that say, oh no, mom, it's not like that, and Kevin. You don't even necessarily have to agree with that. If you knew your lineage and your heritage, and if you knew your history. If you knew your history. Say, our forefathers were Muslims. What are you talking about, Umi? What are you talking about, Grandma? Our forefathers were Muslims. Those that came to this country from this place or that place. Or the people that were in this country. It's a long discussion on the indigenous people of the country. What were they? We're not getting to that right now. Al-Muhim is that many of them, no doubt, were Muslim. Specifically with Muslim names. If you take the view or the theory that black people in America came from Africa, that's a view, as I said, a theory. There are other views and theories as well. But if you take that view and that theory, it's a well-known historical fact. A well-known historical fact that many people that came from West Africa, whether they were traders, whether they were slaves, whether they themselves were Moors from North Africa, slave traders themselves, were Muslims. And they had Muslim names, whether it was an Arabic name or Diallo, West Africa, these countries, there was a large percentage of Muslims. And there were many slaves that knew the whole Quran and that could write Arabic. They found these things on walls and on parchment. Slaves that were oppressed and beat not to read and to write, but they still memorized the Quran. There are documents, there's historical facts that there were rebellions that were made by slaves who came from Liberia and Ghana and other places like this that had detailed knowledge of warfare that was only known to the Muslims who dealt with other tribes and other races like the Arabs, etc. They were Muslims. So if you want to get technical, Islam is the default. And if you want to get technical with the Christianity, the cross was thrown on you through violence. So you have forsaken your forefathers, grandma. You've forsaken your ancestors. So history is very important. And if it's used properly, it is a very strong and formidable weapon. Very strong and formidable weapon if it's wielded properly, knowing the facts. And you never have to apologize for facts. You don't have to apologize for telling the truth, to saying what it is. This is the truth, read it. But the average person doesn't read. The average person doesn't understand how to critically understand and break down and look into things. And they just take the narration that's given to them. This is where you come from, this is your family, this is Kevin, and that's Kevin. And that's not true. It doesn't mean that you have to be a conspiracy theorist. The facts are the facts. Tight. Moving forward. He says the Prophet ﷺ, he stayed in Mecca for 13 years. After he became a prophet, he remained in Mecca for 13 years. And others, they say it was only 10 years. And a third view says that it was 15 years he stayed in Mecca. As we've explained before, the different discrepancies with regards to history and the dates and the numbers, etc. Now, the question is, what's the difference between a prophet and a messenger? Whereas Nawawi clearly mentioned that he was a Rasul, and then he mentioned Ba'd al-Nubuwwah, after prophethood and prophecy. What's the difference between the two? Is there a difference between the two?
No.
You say no.
Yes.
Naam or no, yes?
Yes.
It is a difference.
Yes.
You agree?
Distinction.
There's a distinction. Right. Everybody agreed that there's a difference.
The messenger came with a book, the prophet didn't.
Right. The messenger came with a book, and the prophet did it. MashaAllah. MashaAllah. Anybody else? Everybody agree on this? That there's a difference between the two? Nobody feel that it's synonymous?
All the prophets are messengers. All the messengers are prophets.
But not all the prophets are messengers. Tight. Tight. Anybody else? Everybody agree on this? Okay, so with that being said, what's the difference between a prophet and a messenger? He said that a messenger has a book and a prophet doesn't have a book.
They both received revelation, but one was sent to act upon the revelation.
They both received revelation, but one of them was told to do something with it and the other one wasn't. Tayyip, anybody else?
Prophet can be a messenger, but messenger can be a prophet.
A messenger can be a prophet, but every prophet isn't necessarily a messenger, as he mentioned. Anybody else? Any other differences between the two?
Prophet, he also had to follow the legislation of the messenger that came before him.
A prophet had to follow the legislation of a previous messenger. And the messenger followed what legislation? His own?
His own legislation
That was given to him. Right?
And we also have the dalil from the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the messengers.
Right. Anybody else? Everybody agree on this? Everybody agree on this? So that's the difference? Or those are the differences? Right, let's move forward, inshallah. I'm not going to give my answer. No, he says, then he migrated to Medina. And that's a very long story. And there are many wisdoms and benefits behind the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrating to Medina. Now, I really don't want to get into this because that's a topic in itself. The differences between Mecca and Medina, the time, the atmosphere, the legislation, the Quranic verses, and the surahs between those two periods of time. That's a long, long discussion, and it's extremely important for our situation as minorities in Western countries, whether it be Australia or Canada or America, wherever you go. Us living as minorities is very important. And there are many people who have many, many misunderstandings. And unfortunately, I have heard many of these understandings. Some of them were very, very perverse. Very perverse. So let's take an example of this. There was one brother who said, and he was talking about jihad fi sabilillah. So obviously, of course, anytime the word jihad fi sabilillah is mentioned, it's automatically a negative derogatory sense. There's never anything virtuous. As soon as it's mentioned, it's not, oh, but they're wrong. This is never, ever Allah and His Messenger say this. Never. You understand this? Whenever the word is mentioned, is what? It's automatic allergy to the word. You ever think about this? There's never, ever, no one is going to say anything about it being positive, regardless of what's going on in this country, but just the fact that this is what the Quran says. But there's always what it isn't. It's not jihad. And it's jihad enough. And these people are terrorists, and they're not making jihad, and they're not. It's never ever in the positive direction. So this one brother, obviously he was a victim of the times in which we live. So he said, yeah, you know, the brothers, they're talking about jihad, and they're talking about these other things. He says, you know, we as Muslims, we're living in the Meccan period. He says, we live in the Meccan period, akhi. That's what he said. That the Muslims in the world, not just in America, in the world, are living in the Meccan period. So, quick pop quiz. Is this statement, you get a green check or red X? And why? Why? Green check. What'd you say, akhi? Green check or a red X?
Green check.
A green check. Allahu Akbar. Allah is definitely the greatest. Green or red?
Red.
Red. All right, why you get a green check?
I believe by what he meant by that statement.
La 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 la. Ya akhi, there is no what he meant. That's what he said. That's the true what? Salafiyah. Huh? He said it. You said it. Sahih? There's no interpretation. Why is that statement correct?
I believe it's correct because we're in a state in which we don't control the politics of our environment.
We don't make policy. We don't control politics. Tayyib. Are you married?
Yes.
MashaAllah. You have children?
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless your family.
Right.
What year was the legislation of marriage sent down in the Quran? What surah is marriage mentioned? Amma yatasa'aloon. Tabarak alladhi biyadihi al-mulk. Marriage. The rulings of marriage is mentioned in Surah An-Nisa or Baqarah or Talaq, Mumtahina. Very good. What else? Ma'idah. What else? Good answers. What else? Wahakida, Qad Sami'a, etc. All of these surahs were sent down where?
In Medina.
Mecca? Surah An-Nisa in Mecca?
No, Medina.
Baqarah?
Medina.
So therefore you have to divorce your wife. What if I say your wife is divorced from you now? There was no legislation of this in where?
In Mecca.
In the Meccan period. You were married from before, from Jahiliyyah, but the legislation of Islamic marriage and ta'addud, polygamy and mahar and this and that was sent down when?
In
Medina. So this is just one quick example of how that statement gets a big fat what?
Red X.
Red X. Not a small one, but a what?
Big.
Everyone understand this? And there are many other things. That's disrespect. Allah says, Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum. And there is no interpretation. No. First of all, he said it. Let alone the fact that you can't make a statement like that. When Allah says, on this day, I have perfected for you your religion. So how can you say that Allah says that the religion is perfected? This is from the last verses that were sent down about the Prophet, but we're only living in the first 10 or 13 years of it. You're telling Allah that he's wrong and he made a mistake. And there are many, many, many other issues like that. Everyone clear on this or not? So that's not a correct statement. Now, Muslims being weak, Muslims not controlling, Muslims being the minority, etc. Those are reminiscent of the Meccan period. But you cannot say this the Meccan period. That's disrespect to Allah and His Messenger. 5, Salah. And like I said, marriage, buying, selling, Hajj, Zakat, fasting. They were all sent down where? In Medina. The prayer was made obligatory towards the last years of the Meccan period. All of the legislation came down in Medina. So how can you say we're living in the Meccan period? That's total foolishness and nonsense to make that statement. And it may be kufr akbar to say that. I would understand this. Now, do we take lessons from the Meccan period? Of course. Being the minority, being weak, etc. But how long are the Muslims going to keep saying that? And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Ihris ala ma yanfa'uk wasta'in billahi wa la ta'jaz." He says, work hard upon that which is a benefit. Seek Allah's help and don't make yourself weak and incapable. So if you keep saying we're living in the Meccan period, we're this, it's going to get what in your head? That we are all weak, we all small, we are this, we don't have nothing, we'll never have nothing. Like your father says, you're a loser, son, you never amount to anything. You're weak, you're this, you're that. And he keeps telling you and telling you and telling you and telling you and telling you. There's some sons, they may use that negativity to push them to be something. But many sons, if not most sons, will end up being a victim of what their father said about them. And those who do become something in life, they'll always have that black shadow over their heads, always. No matter how much of a champion or a rich business person, he'll always feel insecure. And his father will be on his deathbed, and he'll think, did I make you happy, Father? Have I pleased you? Am I this? Am I that? Everyone understand this? So we have to be very mindful of making statements like this. The Muslims being a minority, the Muslims having weak infrastructure, no one can deny that. But we have to try to change that to the best of our ability, according to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. We are not living in the Meccan period. We're not living in the Meccan period. You cannot make a statement like that. This is the period of perfection of Islam. Applying some of the rules, some of the legislation, etc., perhaps. But your Aqidah always must remain. If we don't have the Sharia here in Philadelphia, you can't believe in your heart that the Sharia isn't what's mandatory and obligatory. The Prophet ﷺ, he tells us, if you see an evil, change it. If you can't change it, speak out against it. If you can't speak out against it, at least hate it in your heart. And if you don't, or hate it in your heart, he says it's the weakest level of Iman. And another hadith about the prophets and the messengers and how they had hawariyun, they had disciples who followed their way. And then after those prophets and messengers and their disciples came what? Later generations who opposed him, who went against him. The hadith says, so he who fights them with his hand is a believer. He who speaks out against them is a believer. Until the last part of hadith that says, and there's no part of Iman after that. Habbatu khardalin, except for a grain of mustard, a mustard seed. If you don't have that belief in your heart, what it's supposed to be like, it's okay, it's all right, because we're living in the Meccan period. Everyone understand this? And there are many, many other reasons why that statement is utterly and totally 101% false. There's no interpretation you can put on that. Everyone understand this? We are the minority, but we still make salah. You have a beard. And the list goes on of things that you do that were only sent down where? In Medina. Are you afraid to be a Muslim in Philadelphia? You walk with a thobe. You have a beard. You're in public. What were the Muslims like in the Meccan period? Everyone understand this? In the early years of the Meccan period, example after example, why that statement is what? Is erroneous. And no one of true knowledge would make a statement like that, except he's a pacifist, a defeatist, someone who has a very little bit of knowledge to make a statement like that, and he wishes to explain and justify weakness of the Muslims and say we're living in the Meccan period. You can't make that statement. You can't say things like that. So with that being said, there are different styles between the period of Mecca and the period of Medina, with regards to the Muslims being the minority and the Muslims being the majority. With regards to the Muslim having political influence, and obviously that's another problem because they say there's no politics in Islam. Correct? Whenever politics are mentioned, it's always mentioned in a what? A negative, derogatory state. There's no such thing as politics. Whether it's voting, Muslims doing this, there's no such thing as politics in Islam. That's also incorrect Islamically. There were politics in Medina, there were politics in Mecca. How the Prophet behaved, how the companions behaved, what they did. No question. Things that were treaties and agreements, what to do. Politics surrounds life. So no person of real knowledge will make a statement like that. There's no such thing as politics in Islam. Or some who try to be better than that, they say, well, this is a legislative issue and this is a political issue. Who separated the two? The Christians did, church and state. That's a different story. We're not them. And the list goes on and on and on of these misconceptions that many of us have. And the only way out of these misconceptions is going back to the pure and organic understanding. The pure and organic understanding in every aspect of the religion. Every aspect of the deen. Everyone understand this? And the hypocritical thing, that perhaps is the last thing I'll say tonight, and I'm not talking about nobody specifically, this is general. But the hypocritical thing is, people they say we live in the Meccan period, or they know politics in Islam, and many of the Islamic rulings that they believe are correct rulings are based off of politics and based off of legislation in Medina. The reason why it's haram to do this is because of a fatwa given that is politically what? Influenced. The reason why we have to say this and do this is because of fatwa that's given in a political atmosphere. And this poor miskin person, he doesn't even realize it. He doesn't even realize that he's just being manipulated and used as a toy or a puppet. So you have to be mindful of this. And the cure is that if you have nothing good to say, then don't say anything. If you don't have that much knowledge, don't speak. If you have a lot of knowledge, if you don't have to speak, don't speak. And don't make these statements like this unless you know what you're talking about. Unless you really know what you're talking about. And even then, you still have to be mindful of what you say. So therefore, perhaps we'll mention this in the next class, some of the benefits and some of the differences between the Meccan period and the Medinian period. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surely knows best. Wa sallallahu sallam wa barak ala abdihi wa rasulihi nabina wa imamina Muhammad. You got your phone, Mikey? You got your phone? You mind reading questions? Mm-hmm. I tell you, I'll read them. If there are any questions here, we will give precedence to the brothers and the sisters in person first, if there are any. Question says from Nazia H. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Is there a Q&A after this? Abu Ibrahim Asad says most likely, but it's always a new video. Tayyip, first question says Amira Ali. Assalamu alaikum Sheikh. Can I ask a question here? Q&A, Tayyip. MashaAllah, jazakallahu khairan for informing me. Okay. First question, it looks like a spammer from someone. I mean, I'm going to mention that right now. If he does take the questions, be in the proper format. Sorry, are there any questions, brothers or sisters? Question says, Khabib the Eagle. Assalamu alaikum Sheikh. Is it right or wrong to raise our hands up to say Ameen during the khutbah when the Sheikh is making dua? Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I say yes and a no answer. The yes part is that the asl of making dua is that you raise your hands. There are many authentic hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ made dua to Allah and he raised his hands. Different ways in which he raised his hands. He raised them a little, he raised them a lot, he stretched out his arms, etc. So raising the hands in the dua, there lies no doubt there's a connection between the two. That's the general rule. However, doing it in a specific way every single time in which the Prophet ﷺ could have done it, but he didn't do it. Or the companions had the ability to do it, but they didn't do it. You should avoid it. You should avoid it. So if the Imam is giving the khutbah and he says, may Allah bless the Muslims, may Allah do this, and you say, Ameen, you raise your hands, you did it once or twice. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bid'ah. Doesn't necessarily mean it's haram, because there's general proof to support that. But each and every time, as soon as the Imam sits down, the people, they raise their hands when they sit between the two khutbahs. The Prophet gave a lot of khutbahs. As one of the companions narrated, she was a woman. She says, I only learned Qaf, Surah Qaf, from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu reciting it on the minbar. Many khutbahs the Prophet gave. And it's not mentioned that the companions would do that every time, or that he himself would do it every time. So therefore, this is a general rule that can go more than one direction. Can you raise your hands and make dua after the salah? You can't necessarily say it's haram and it's a bid'ah. Because you can raise your hands and you can make dua. It's not restricted. But there are other things which the Prophet did when he made the tasneem. And there are other times which the Prophet instructed us to make dua with regards to the tashahhud. And when you finish your tashahhud, before you make the tasneem. So to keep doing it over and over again in a specific way is going to lead you to something which is clearly problematic. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. That's in brief. Question says, Sheikh, can I put dye on my hair? I'm not old with gray hair. Neither am I hiding anything. Can I just put black dye for beautification? It's on the same questioner. And inshallah ta'ala, if the brothers and sisters could please mention where you're from, the HadithDisciple format. The format is that you have to mention your initials and your town and your state, or your city or your country. There's nothing wrong with dyeing your hair for men and for women. Rather, there's certain times and certain types of dye which is recommended. It's recommended, whether it's henna or henna and ketam, or woman dyeing her hair any color that she wants to for the pleasure of her husband. But black dye should be avoided. Solid black should not be done. The ulama of Islam, they differ on this issue. Some of them say that it's haram to use black dye on your beard or your hair for men and for women. And others, they say Rather, it is not haram in certain instances, such as a woman who's dyeing her hair for her husband. And some of them, they say, one who's fighting in the cause of Allah, to dye his hair black, to appear strong in front of the enemy, psychological warfare, and not to present the Muslims as being old and weak. They say it's permissible. And there are others from among the ulama of Islam, from the Salaf and those who came after them, will say that there's nothing wrong with it at all. There's nothing wrong with it at all to use black dye. So the safest view is to avoid it. That's the safest thing to do. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. That's in brief. Next question says, I know there isn't any racism in Islam, but how to deal with racism? Al-Muhim, the concept of racism, I think oftentimes racism is a vague term. Sometimes it's clear what it means, but sometimes the term can be vague and misleading. Discrimination, prejudice, bigotry, fanaticism. I think those words are clearer and more defined. Right? They're more direct to the point. Everyone understand this? Okay? Hating someone just because of their race or their ancestry or their background. All right? Things like this. As we said before, many people, they say that Islam is colorblind and there's no recognition of color in Islam. That's not always necessarily true. Sometimes Islam is color conscious. And Allah mentions that it's from His signs that you have different colors. That's from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you have different colors, as Allah mentions in the Quran. So due to the fact that you have different colors, it shows the power of Allah and the strength of Allah. And it shows the diversity and the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's all beautiful. So that's the concept of accepting a color or a race. That's one aspect. Also, from another aspect, with regards to knowing your family and knowing your tribe, and for a person to look after his people and the needs and the ills of his people before someone else, it does not mean that that's a bad thing. And many people, they say, well, you're being a black nationalist, or you're this and you're that. In all honesty, the people, they know that this brother is not a black nationalist. They know he's not. They know that this brother is not calling to black nationalism or white nationalism. But they refuse to accept the fact that this brother or this sister has the courage and has the guts to talk about the bad social ills that no one else wants to talk about. And we just want to keep ignoring and act like they don't exist and walking past them. Everyone understand this? It is not happening. It's not real, you know. And it's dead smack in front of your face. And we don't want to deal with it and talk about it. So there's a brother who has the courage to talk about it. And he has the knowledge to talk about it. And he's not afraid and he's not apologetic. So therefore, if you're brave and courageous and you're not apologetic, and I'm cowardly and weak and soft and apologetic, you're going to make me look bad. You made me look soft. So to keep the attention from you outshining me and embarrassing me, I have to bring you down and call you a nationalist. Call you a nationalist. What's a nationalist? First, say we have problems here in our country, and this is what we need to focus on. This is what we need to deal with. And this outsider, and this foreign person, and this person who comes from this place, he can just pack up his bags and leave when he wants to. Is that black nationalism or white nationalism? No. If there's a brother who's from Puerto Rico or from Dominican Republic, and he accepts Islam, and he learns the deen, and he gives dawah in Spanish, and he makes an organization or a masjid or a charitable foundation for Latino Muslims or Hispanic Muslims, and he focuses on Spanish and the problems that people suffer from that come from Dominican Republic. You say he's a nationalist? It doesn't mean that. If there's a brother who came from West Africa and he made a center or a masjid in which he spoke French, or he spoke one of the native dialects of West Africa or the native languages, and he says brothers that come over, they have a hard time getting a job, they have problems with their family, with their wives, their sons, we're going to focus on these problems. But if a white person or a blue person comes to the masjid, he's our brother. But the majority of the community is from West Africa. So we have to focus on the problems of West African immigrants. Does that mean that that's nationalism? What type of sense are we using here? So something is seriously wrong with the way we think oftentimes. So with that being said, Islam, there's no racism in Islam. The word racism oftentimes is vague, as I just said. That's first and foremost. Secondly is, Just because there's no racism in Islam or prejudice or colorism, it doesn't mean that the Muslims aren't racist or prejudiced or colorist or discriminatory, etc. And oftentimes, yani, this is one of the worst things that you encounter here and overseas. And don't think it's a black and white thing or Arab and black thing. You may find a brother, this is nothing against nobody, but it's the truth. This brother, he may come from West Africa. He may be from Fulani tribe, or this place, or wherever he comes from. And his skin may be 10 times darker than yours. And he looks down upon you and scorns you and disdains you. And he may call you a traditional term for a cotton picker. And his skin is black. But there's prejudice. There's discrimination. You're a descendant of a slave. I'm a descendant of a king or a warrior or a scholar. So this is all around the board. Black, white, Arab, black, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Chinese. The Jahiliyyah is Jahiliyyah. So people who are Muslims, it doesn't mean that they're implementing Islam properly. And that doesn't mean that they understand Islam properly. And it doesn't mean they practice Islam properly. So oftentimes, and the reality is the reality, you may find the worst racism and prejudice among Muslims. There's no doubt about that. And I can say out of my life, I've never been discriminated against by kuffar as much as I've been by Muslims. Whether they're in Arabs or Africans or any other place. This is reality. So we have to make a distinction between the two. Islam is one thing, which is crystal clear. Muslims, a different story. Good Muslims, bad Muslims, knowledgeable Muslims, ignorant Muslims, half and half, etc. So you have to be mindful of the difference. And as I said before, and I'll say this again, is that we don't always necessarily have to become sad or upset or downcast when we talk about racism or the problems that the Muslims have. But sometimes it should help you be a better Muslim and increase you in Iman. And that's because the Prophet ﷺ, he told us it was going to be like this. The Prophet informed us that there are things people would never ever abandon. And from the things that they'll never ever abandon is taking pride in their lineage. And from the things that people would never ever abandon is attacking others and looking into their lineage. This is going to be like this. So when you see these things, it should increase you in Iman. As Allah Azza wa Jalla mentioned in the 33rd chapter, that when the believers, when they saw the Ahzab, they saw the Confederates, they saw the Mushrikun, the conspirators from the Jews, they saw the Munafiqs all coming together to fight them in Medina. They said, this is what Allah and His Messenger has promised us. And Allah and His Messenger have spoken the truth. And it only increased them in Iman and submission. So they saw this terrible sight. They were outnumbered. These people had traded on them, etc. And it didn't make them upset. They didn't become mad and angry, but it made them better Muslims. The Prophet told us is that there will be people who will have the filth of Jahiliyyah. And obviously racism and colorism and feminism and all these different isms, they need to be spoken about. And they have to be addressed. And they have to be brought up to the table. And I don't feel it's permissible for us to conveniently ignore them and to say it doesn't exist. That's no such thing, brother. That's not true. And Allah knows best. Next question says, Sheikh, if I'm too lazy and have a lot of hesitation to do everything, what does it mean if I'm caught with the evil eye or something? Perhaps it does. Some of the ulama say that unexplained lethargy and unexplained lack of energy can be from the signs of jinn possession. And can be from the signs of sihr being placed upon you. When a person uncontrollably yawns all of the time. All of the time. Now just think about this now. You may laugh or you may think it's a joke, but it's not a joke. It's a comparison. Think about your phone. Your phone sends you a notification. And the notification says there are 17 apps in the background draining your battery. Right? There's an app on your phone that's what? Causing severe loss of your battery. Close this app. Manage storage. Manage your battery options. Everyone understand this? The app could have a bug. It could be a bad app. Right? The app could be doing something with data, with navigation that you don't know about. And it's doing what? Sucking the energy from your phone and you don't even realize it. So when you're losing energy, your battery is low, something's wrong. Has to be something inside that's parasitical, that's taking and sucking your energy and you don't realize that. So some of the ulama said it's the concept of jinn possession. There are different signs of a person that's possessed by a jinn. And from those signs is unexplanatory or unexplainable laziness and lethargy. And a person is always tired and fatigued and beat down and yawning. And they never feel enthused or energized to do anything. And Allah knows best. Next question says, MK, mashallah, beautiful type. Allah bless you too as well, akhi. Sheikh, is it a must that I have to know the Quran's meaning instead of only read it? You have to know some of the meaning of the Quran without question. You have to know the basics of the Quran, of Surah Fatiha. You have to know the basics of Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Qul A'udhu bi Rabbil Falaq, Qul A'udhu bi Rabbin Nas. You have to know the basics of what you recite in prayer and what you hear being recited in prayer. The basics, I said. The basics. The layman Muslim does not have to be a scholar of tafsir, but he has to know the bare necessities. And Allah knows best. Question says, AS from St. Louis, Missouri. Assalamu alaikum, Mufti. Is it permissible for a Muslim man to visit a female cousin and stay overnight as long as he has a private room and her mahram husband is present? Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just because someone, or you're not a mahram from someone, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not related to you, or they're not a family member, or there's some type of connection. And if there's some type of connection, whether it's through blood or other than blood, then that person has some type of rights over you, or some type of haqq over you. And from that haqq could be visiting them, or giving them money, or giving them dawah, or being kind to them. So just because it's your cousin, and you're not mahrams, and you can get married, it doesn't mean that you can't never ever visit them. And you can never ever show them love and respect and kindness. It doesn't mean that. Your sister-in-law, you're not a mahram for your sister-in-law. If you're married to her sister, and she has another sister, you're not mahrams. It's haram for you to marry her and her sister at the same time. But if you had divorced your wife, or she died, it's permissible for you to marry her sister. So you're not a mahram. It's not eternally haram for you to marry that woman. But does that mean when you see your sister-in-law, you don't speak to her? You can't say, Assalamu alaikum, how you doing? You give her respect, a smile with respect and honor. You can't drop off some groceries or some pastries at their house. No, that doesn't mean that. And many people, they think this. That's not the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. You be kind to someone, even if the person isn't a Muslim, in the proper light. In the proper light. So therefore, if you're in a place and there's no seclusion, there's no khalwa, there's nothing haram that's going on, it's like any other place. You can be in your own home doing haram. And you can be in someone else's house not doing haram. Al-Muhim, the rules. If you're not with her by yourself, her husband is there, it's a secure atmosphere, Bismillah. And Allah knows best. Question says, it says, MR, Hyderabad, India. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. How should I give advice to a close family member about innovations and fake stories of walis, which are common in India? Sometimes I lose my cool. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah bless you and all hadith disciples in India. Just tell them the truth. Tell them the truth. Tell them what you've learned. Tell them that Allah Azza wa Jal blessed you to know about the Quran and the Sunnah. And that the Quran and the Sunnah affirms that there are walis. There's no doubt about that. Allah has walis. And Allah Himself is al-wali. And Allah is the wali of those who believe. But not like how we do it here in India, in which you worship the wali, or make tawaf, or light a candle at his grave, or he can marry 10 women, or he doesn't have to pray, or he has knowledge of the unseen, or he can travel from one continent to the next in 2 minutes, and things like this. So there's a balance. We don't disrespect the wali of Allah, nor do we worship the wali of Allah. It's that simple. And it's not about Ibn Taymiyyah, or Ibn Abdul Wahhab, or Ibn Baz. It's about Allah and His Messenger. Allah clearly affirms that there are walis. And Allah clearly affirms, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. From men are those who take partners along with Allah, and they love them with Allah. So we don't do that. Allah says that in the Quran. And Allah also says in the Quran, أَلَا أَنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. The walis of Allah have no fear. They have no grief, no stress. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. Those who believed in taqwa. So Allah affirms their walis, and Allah clearly negates and abolishes and falsifies shirk. Period. That's it. So what is this wali here in Hyderabad? Is this someone that prays and fasts and has ilm? He's a mujahid. He spends in Allah's cause. The people, they love him. They seek his advice. They learn from him. Alhamdulillah. If there are people in India who say that they're following Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, or saying that they're Salafis, or saying they're Ahlul Sunnah, and they disrespect this man or this woman, They say they're not upon the sunnah, they're not following the salaf. And if there are people in India who are saying that there is a wali, we have to carry him, we have to worship him, we have to give him all of our money, we have to marry him to all of our daughters, we have to. We say they're also wrong. And they're not following the Quran and the sunnah. So everything in Islam is based off of balance. There are walis, but not to be made as lords besides Allah. And the wali is someone who's pious and righteous, and not someone who's a charlatan, not someone who's a con artist, someone who makes money saying I can fly and I can forgive you and your wife will become pregnant if I stroke her belly and things like this. There's a balance. It has to be a balance. But the problem comes, and Allah knows best, the problem is complicated and is made worse when people who call themselves Ahlul Sunnah, Ahlul Hadith, have a little bit of knowledge and a great deal of haste. They have a little bit of fiqh. They have a little bit of hikmah. And they have a great deal of speech. Talking about people and reviling people and criticizing people. So it pushes them to another side of extremism. Everyone understand this? Look at these people. These are the Wahhabis. Everyone understand this? So it has to be a balance. And the people of the Sunnah, wherever you are, Philadelphia or India, you have a great duty on your hands. A major responsibility to learn the correct deen and to practice it with wisdom. And to be strong in your ilm and not to compromise. But offer the people the Sunnah how it's meant to be offered. And Allah knows best. Next question says, Assalamu alaikum Shaykh, is bidding for items on eBay halal? In Al-Islam, it's permissible for people to buy and sell. And there's nothing wrong with necessarily having a bid or making a bid. It's impermissible to lie, to cheat, to steal. And it's impermissible, as the hadith says, وَلَا تَنَاجَشُوا. Do not make najash. And a najash is when there's someone in the crowd who keeps raising the price, but he really doesn't want to buy the thing. He's in cahoots with the seller of the car, right? The sheriff sell, right? 200 going once. 200, 250, he says. 250 going once, and he keeps raising the prices. He really doesn't want to buy it. So the ulama say that hadith prohibits that. So if that's prohibited, that proves that bidding in Islam is permissible as long as it's done properly. So there are things online that are done properly, and they are Islamically or Sharia compliant, and there are things that can be done online which are improperly done, haram, and they're not compliant with the Sharia. What's important is, as long as the rules are the same, buying it online, Amazon, eBay is no different than trading a pound or an ounce or a saw or a mud of barley and dates and salt. It's all the same concept. And Allah knows best. Next question says, it says Imar Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum Sheikh. My name is Imar Ahmed from Boston, Massachusetts. Is bidding nine. We got that already. Hamza Flash. It says Wagwan Mufti. Wagwan. AS from St. Louis, Missouri. Assalamu alaikum Mufti. Do we have any authentic sources on Maryam's life after Isa ascended? Allah knows best. History. People mention things and say things. The isnad is from the specific traits of this ummah. The isnad, and accurately tracing information, is from the specific characteristics of this ummah. And even with the isnad and the sciences of hadith, there's still discrepancy. He says this year, he says that year. So that's very difficult to accurately trace back. And most importantly, the next question is from Amira Ali. My father passed away 7 years ago, and my mom got remarried. Her new husband doesn't know how to recite Fatiha properly, and because of that I stopped praying behind him. My mom gets mad. Give him advice, and give your mother advice. Help them out. Don't turn away from them doing something that's clearly wrong. Give them advice. Perhaps they'll listen to you. Lead them in the direction of a learned person, of a knowledgeable person, of a scholar, of an alim, an imam in Islam. But in the meantime, don't pray behind someone that you feel the prayer is invalid. Don't pray behind someone that you feel is not doing the necessary fundamentals of the prayer. But give them advice at the same time. And don't allow them to remain upon that misguidance. Okay? Adinu nasiha. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Question says, should we focus on giving dawah, especially to our people where we are from? Walaikum salam. Yes and no. You give dawah to the people from your town, your city, your locale, and you give dawah to anyone else you encounter. Rather, you may not have the ability to give dawah in your city. You may not have the ability to do things in your city. The Prophet himself, he had to leave his hometown. And he never ever went back there again to live. He passed away in Medina. He wasn't from Medina, he's from Mecca. So you give dawah wherever you can. And wherever the situation is best, that's what you do. But it doesn't mean that you forget about your own family and your own people. Because the Prophet, he left Mecca, but in actuality he didn't leave Mecca. The teachings were still there. The Muslims that had an ilm were still there. He planted that seed in Mecca that was going to remain. Everyone understand this? Let alone him going back to Mecca himself. Everyone understand this? Another very important point is, if you go to another city or another town or you give dawah in another place, that's fine. But do not make fitna and problems and your city or your town or your country is bone dry. Something's wrong. If you go somewhere and you become Shaykhul Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, quote unquote, and your country, your city, your town, or your village is nothing, something's wrong. If you're so zealous about dawah and ilm and knowledge and teaching people and saving people, why is your city dead? There's nothing there. There's no ilm, there's no dawah. Something isn't right. Last but not least, to go somewhere and make major problems and to turn people against each other after they loved each other for the sake of Allah and were with each other for the sake of Allah, and bring some nonsense or some bogus, vague terms and fancy terminologies and some exotic concoctions to justify a tafriq, to justify splitting people up. Brothers that were brothers for the sake of Allah upon the sunnah, they don't even speak to each other now. You see him, you make a mean mug, harder than when you see a kafir, because of you. But back home in your town, in your city, wallahi, I haven't heard or seen anything about your town. Ilm and da'wah and knowledge. There's nothing there. Something has to be what? And we mentioned this the summer before last, if not the last time, we mentioned this on the night shift. We mentioned this. Use your minds, use your eyes. Something isn't right. As far as this is where I'm from, but I moved to another city, I go back to that place, I give dawah there are people there, tell you, alhamdulillah, that's not wrong with that, that's not haram. But for you never ever to go back to your city, your town, ever. And for you to be a major means of fitna and conspiracy and scandal in another foreign land in which you live like a king, something isn't right. And oftentimes we choose blindness. We like to conveniently become ignorant. But the facts are clearly in front of your face. And Allah knows best. If you feel I'm talking about you, then I'm talking about you. If the shoe fits, then what? You got to wear it. Question says, we know that when the imam reaches the minbar, we're not allowed to speak after that. So is this after he gives salams? When the adhan is called, after the call gives salams, do we repeat after the mu'adhin? Repeating after the mu'adhin is not what's meant by speaking and talking. Speaking and talking about things that are not pertaining to the adhan. Rather, it's permissible to speak to the imam if the imam speaks to you. If the imam asks you a question, you can respond to the imam. But speaking to other than the imam, or talking about that which is other than the adhan and things like this, that's what's meant by that ruling from those hadiths. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. This is where we're going to stop here tonight. Sallallahu sallam wa barak ala abdihi wa rasulihi nabiyina wa imam Muhammad. Which is the last question, Aqiq?
Regarding greeting, when someone says, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and you reply, wa alaikum, and say that this was from the hadith mentioned, the hadith from the Messenger of Allah, where he said that you have left me nothing else better to say. Is that fabricated or is this accurate?
Whenever someone gives you the salams in full length, you give them the salams in full length. That's the direction of the Quran. Whenever you're given a greeting, then give that which is better, or at least give equal. And the Prophet ﷺ, and the authentic, well-known hadiths, he would give the people the salams, they would give him the salams, and it would be equal or better. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Fadli. Go ahead.
Like